In October 1962, the world stood still. For 13 days, humanity held its breath. Two nuclear superpowers, locked in a deadly standoff, stood just one mistake away from global annihilation. This is the story of how the world came to the brink of nuclear war, and how we barely avoided it. The Cold War was a clash of ideologies, power, and fear. The United States and the Soviet Union, capitalism versus communism, engaged in a global chess match that shaped nearly every nation on Earth. By the early 1960s, tensions were rising. Both sides had thousands of nuclear weapons. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction meant any direct conflict could end life as we know it. In 1959, Cuban leader Fidel Castro led a revolution that overthrew the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. Castro turned to the Soviet Union, openly embracing communism and defying American influence. After the US tried and failed miserably to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs in 1961, Castro became convinced that another attack was coming. He sought protection, and Premier Nikita Khrushchev answered. Khrushchev secretly deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba in mid-1962. His plan was to level the playing field. The US already had missiles in Turkey pointed at the USSR. Now, the Soviets would have missiles just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane captured photographs of missile sites under construction in Cuba. The images were undeniable. Nuclear weapons were being assembled just off America's coast. President John F. Kennedy was briefed on the findings the next morning. Thus began 13 of the most dangerous days in human history. Kennedy formed a secret committee of advisors known as XCOM. Some demanded an immediate airstrike to destroy the missiles. Others feared that attacking Cuba could trigger a Soviet response, possibly in Berlin or even against the US itself. Among the voices in the room, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who urged caution, General Curtis LeMay, who aggressively pushed for military action, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the president's brother and closest confidant, National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, who helped analyze each move like a chess game. Kennedy rejected an immediate strike. Instead, he authorized a naval blockade, termed a quarantine, to prevent more Soviet weapons from reaching Cuba. On October 20th, Kennedy finalized the quarantine plan. Over the next 2 days, the US Navy mobilized to intercept Soviet ships. Secretly, American forces moved to DEFCON 3, heightened military readiness. On the evening of October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
American forces reached DEFCON 2, the highest level ever recorded in US history, one step from full nuclear war. On October 24th, Soviet ships approached the blockade line. The world held its breath. But then, unexpectedly, they stopped. Some turned back. It was the first sign of restraint. But the missiles already in Cuba were still operational. Reconnaissance flights showed launch sites being rapidly constructed. Kennedy knew time was running out. Khrushchev sent a personal letter to Kennedy. Emotional and disorganized, it proposed a peaceful resolution. The USSR would remove the missiles if the US pledged not to invade Cuba. Then came the darkest day of the crisis, what historians call Black Saturday. A US U-2 reconnaissance plane was shot down over Cuba. Its pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. Another U-2 accidentally entered Soviet airspace over Alaska. Soviet fighters scrambled. The risk of accidental war was growing by the hour. That day, a second letter from Khrushchev arrived, more aggressive. It demanded that the US remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey in exchange for Soviet withdrawal from Cuba. Kennedy and his team feared that Khrushchev was losing control, or being pressured by hardliners. The US had to respond carefully. Kennedy decided to publicly respond only to the first, peaceful letter, agreeing not to invade Cuba if the missiles were removed. In secret, he sent his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, to deliver a private message to the Soviet ambassador. The US would remove its missiles from Turkey, but not publicly and not immediately. It would be a quiet trade. On Sunday, October 28th, Khrushchev agreed. He announced that the Soviet Union would withdraw its missiles from Cuba. The world exhaled. The crisis left a deep mark. The US and USSR installed a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow to prevent future misunderstandings. Nuclear negotiations became more serious. But the cost was high. Castro, left out of the deal, felt betrayed by the Soviets. US-Cuba relations remained frozen for decades. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a Cold War standoff. It was a warning about power, pride, and the importance of communication. In today's world, with nuclear weapons still spread across the globe and tensions rising in new regions, the lessons of 1962 are more relevant than ever. 13 days nearly ended civilization, but through restraint, diplomacy, and a willingness to compromise, the world stepped back from the edge.